Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello, I'm Zena Shefchik. Welcome to Parenting in the 21st Century. Today we have with us Jenness Clairmont from the Samaritan Counseling Center of the Capital Region. Our topic today is how parents and step-parents can go about creating successful blended families. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
The first thing, if you would, tell us what the general working definition might be of a blended family.
Well, a blended family could be any combination of people, biological and not biological, that have a family living situation which is created on account of remarriage, divorce, death, and that could be any number of children or parents.
Right. Before we go any further, would you tell us a little bit about the Samaritan Counseling Center and your education and background and your experience?
The Samaritan Counseling Center has been in existence we celebrated our 20th anniversary in 2005, and we have offices in four different counties: Saratoga County, Schenectady County, Albany County, and Rensselaer County. We provide psychotherapeutic counseling services to individuals, families, and couples. And we have various programs that serve clergy in the area, schools in the area, and also survivors of trauma. And we're very specific about providing treatment to those groups based on no specific financial situation. So that means that they're eligible to receive counseling services despite need.
And do you have a referral system? I mean, are you generally, people find out about you from their primary physician or schools situation?
Schools, primary care physicians, clergy is a big provider of the referral that we receive, and previous clients. We receive a big portion of our clientele from previous clients also.
Can you tell me something about you and your background and your education experience?
I attended SUNY Albany for 4 years and got my bachelor's degree in psychology. Following that, I completed the MSW program at SUNY Albany and have been practicing since 2002. I am a licensed clinical social worker as well as a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Okay, so you actually do counseling, because I saw that you were a coordinator of training.
Yeah, we have a training program, so we take students from marriage and family therapy programs, social work programs, and mental health counseling programs throughout the area, from all throughout New York State, and I coordinate the training program for the interns. We also have a residency program that is post-grad, that is 2 years following a graduate degree, where people receive intensive supervision and are specifically trained to provide psychotherapy. And I coordinate those. I am also the Albany County Site Director and do the PR for Samaritan.
Okay, so a big plate of things to do.
Pretty busy.
Can you tell us how often you think the blended families come to your centers for assistance? I mean, it's my sense from my own experience and researching this topic, is that the blended families are very prevalent these days, and much more so, and growing. Is that what you see in your practices?
I certainly see quite a bit of it in my own practice. I specialize in seeing blended families and families that are a little more chaotic and possibly lower functioning than some other people that I work with. But I would say on average we probably see 1/3 to half of the clientele at Samaritan is families, and of that probably well over well over 50 to 60% of those are blended family situations.
What are the most common problems blended families have, and maybe you can also tell us about some of their unique challenges as compared to other families?
I don't know necessarily that they always present as blended family issues. Usually it's someone calling in saying that they're having a behavioral issue or an academic issue with one of their children, and then we bring the children in, and typically we don't see children, especially anyone under the age of 15 or 16 individually. We would see them initially as a family and try to get a comprehensive view of what's happening with the child all the way around their entire lives and any surrounding systems in their lives. So following that, usually it's identified that there's something happening where there's a blended family situation that's impacting the child, and on account of it they're acting out or suffering academically or something like that. So usually the way that it presents is a little bit different. It's actually kind of rare that someone will call in and say specifically that they're struggling because their new partner is not getting along with their child. Usually it will manifest itself through the child somehow or other.
So that's who you see the symptom, where you see the symptom.
Right.
Usually it's from how the children are adjusting to a step family or a blended family.
I'd say more often than not, that's how it presents.
Yeah. Is there so that they don't identify the blended family? Very often adults may not recognize that it's the blended family situation that may be the culprit, per se, in a child's difficulty?
I think that it presents itself more often than not that way, and if not, usually a couple might present, and there'll be no children involved, and a couple might present saying that they're having conflict surrounding parenting one another's children or something along those lines. The other way that it often presents itself is in terms of grief. A lot of times a divorce will happen and things seem to get better for a little while, and then a remarriage happens or a move happens or something along those lines, and it kind of reignites this grief that children may have had or that a parent may or may not have had surrounding a divorce. So sometimes we see it and it looks like it's depression, or it looks like it's anxiety, or it looks like something grief-oriented.
So you're talking about grief as loss. I mean, a lot of people might not think of divorce involving grief, but I assume grief is related to loss of any kind, right?
Loss of any kind, and I think it's important to recognize that it's loss of any kind because sometimes, I think there's usually significant periods of time when a parent and a child or children become very close because it's a single parent situation, and the children and the parent have evolved into their own family, and then a remarriage situation happens, and then there's the separation that occurs where the children and the parent is now attaching to another person, and there's a separation and a loss that happens for the children and the parent in that situation. And I don't think that's the kind of loss that a lot of people predict.
Right. So in other words, I'm extrapolating here that perhaps people who create blended families, parents, step-parents, aren't anticipating some of the problems that might arise if they're not recognizing loss or the difficulties a child may have adjusting to change.
I'm not sure if they don't recognize them or if they have different expectations. I think it takes a lot longer. I think on average, the estimation now is that it takes between 4 and 7 years before a child will adjust to a remarriage in any combination. And I think that people expect that now that they've gotten married, they've introduced this person into their lives, that it's only going to take maybe 6 months to a year. And it takes a lot longer actually for children to adjust, and especially dependent on their age developmentally, that can present itself in a whole different host of ways, especially for adolescents. I think between the ages of 10 and 14 is typically the most difficult time period for kids to really adjust to a remarriage situation.
And are there any suggestions you have? Well, you could perhaps instead you could talk about that how why perhaps and why a younger child is better able to adjust than what to me sounds like a middle school child, and what parents or step-parents might do differently depending on the ages of the children in the blended family?
I think for younger children, they are developing a story of what their family looks like anyway, so the younger that they are, you've already given them kind of a story. Mom lives here, dad lives here, you introduce someone new, and they're able to kind of build on that story. The older a child gets, they already had a story, and now they have to change their story, and it becomes a little bit more difficult for them in terms of identity. How they're going to explain this to themselves, to their friends. It becomes a lot more important what their families look like as they get older. You know, where does your mom live? Where does your dad live? There becomes much more discussion about that, and it's not as normalized for them as it is when the kids are smaller. They kind of don't question those things. Now kids are getting a little bit older. They have something they can look back on and question, so it becomes a little bit more conflictual internally, I think, for them.
So how would a parent or a step-parent approach, would there be a different approach to explaining what's going to happen or what the situation is, or helping them adjust to the new situation? Is there a different strategy for handling, parenting a younger child versus say a middle school child?
I think with younger children, giving them a story, it's going to involve a lot less detail. You don't have to explain as much to them. It's kind of like, this is the new person that's coming into your life, slowly introducing themselves on both counts, with younger children or older children. I think to do those things extremely slowly, not to have any expectations about discipline coming from a non-biological parent, and to do those things in a very, very slow, methodical way, not to expect miracles, not to expect them to bond immediately. Smaller children are going to bond a little bit more quickly than older children are. They have a firmer attachment to their biological parent, assuming that they were involved prior to the new person coming into the picture. And older children are going to have more questions. They're going to want more details. They're going to want to know, they're a little bit more discerning. They're going to want to be able to trust this person. They're going to be able to use their intellect more so than a smaller child would, to kind of figure out whether or not they trust or like this person, what their story is. There's going to be more to think about in terms of attachment with an older child than maybe a smaller child, assuming there's no attachment difficulties to begin with.
Right. I saw in some of my research a suggestion that stepmothering is more difficult than stepfathering, and that do you see that kind of situation? Do you think that's too much of a generalization?
I don't. I don't think it's too much of a generalization. I think there's a different expectation on stepmothers that they're going to be caretakers, and I think that just is kind of follows along with any school of feminist thought that you see now, and women are socialized to be caretakers, so that they're going to come in and they're going to either perform that role, and whether that's something that they've put on themselves to think that they're going to kind of be a mother to a child that was not biologically theirs, or if that's an expectation that their new partner put on them, and that they're going to kind of step in and fulfill this role despite the fact that a child might already have a biological parent that is in the picture. If it's a child whose biological mother is not in the picture, even more difficult, because this child also has a grief process that they're going to be working through their entire lives, and to accept this new person in. But I think largely it's this expectation that women are caretakers and they're automatically going to come in and take on that role, and then maybe not fulfill it in the way that either their partner thought that they would, that the child thought that they would have liked to have. I think that it's kind of complicated in terms of the level of expectation.
So it can be the partner's expectation, the stepmother's expectation of herself. That can be really skewed. It can be really out of proportion to what chances are reality will be able.
And I think it's important too to keep in mind the extended families. Let's say this is a situation where a child his biological mother has not been in the picture for some extended period of time, and then a woman comes into the father's life, and I think the extended family can also have an enormous amount of expectation that, oh, here's this woman, she's going to save the day, this child's going to finally have a mother, and whether or not the child and this woman actually get along or not is kind of irrelevant. It's just that there's a woman in the picture and they're going to fulfill this motherly role, and everyone feels better about that.
How much can you prepare children for the beginning of a blended family? Is it different for every situation, or do you recommend kind of meeting as a family and discussing roles, and how much input should a child have into what's happening? In other words, like, should a father or a mother go to her children and say, I'm marrying such and such and we're going to be living together as a family, or this idea of asking children if they accept a new adult in the family rather than a new parent? I mean, is there a variation involved with that, or is there a way you recommend it's introduced?
Well, a couple of things. I think slow going is important, and I'd be careful about what questions you ask, because you might not want the answers, and are you going to actually listen, or are you going to actually do what these children are asking you to do? Or if they say, no, we don't want this person to live with us, or we don't want you marrying that person, is it realistic to think that you're going to end this relationship or not follow through on whatever it is that you and this other person anticipate doing, because the children don't want that? I think if you can go slowly enough, and this is somebody that the child has bonded with and that the adult has bonded with, in a reciprocal way, that a fit of moving in together or getting married is going to be more natural. I don't know that anything should ever be a surprise. I mean, certainly there should be discussion around that. However, I think actions speak louder than words too. I think that if this is done in a fashion that is respectful and patient, and has structure and still feels safe for a child, then it's going to happen a little bit more naturally than it would if you just you've been dating somebody for however many years, and then all of a sudden they're moving in today, and the kids don't really know anything about it, or I think to do those things in a very slow and respectful way to both the adults and the children in the situation.
Okay, so long, slow, careful preparation, it sounds like what you're recommending would be the best case scenario. Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between, say, a step mother or a stepfather and their corresponding, say, non-custodial parent, and the kind of how to get around the potential difficulties within a family with a living perhaps nearby. That's just probably the most common situation, where there is a non-custodial parent living nearby, near the blended family.
What I can say is I see quite a bit of this in my office, where a parent will come in with one of the children and say, this is what's happening, and then it's kind of like this non-custodial parent is off in the ozone, and then I would like to bring in the non-custodial parent and say, what else are you seeing? And I want to talk about whether or not there's some kind of stability across households. I also want the new step parent to come in. I want all the parents to be on the same page. Step parents, biological parents, I want everybody to be on the same page about, not necessarily that they each have to run their household similarly, but that there's agreement about how this child is going to be handled across the households. Not that the rules necessarily need to be the same, but that everybody be on the same page. And that if there are personal issues, if there's unresolved anger, grief, frustration for whatever reasons due to negative circumstances surrounding a breakup or a divorce, that those are being handled separately, and that they're not being handled with this isn't kind of some thing that the child has inherited on account of the fact that these people have unresolved issues from their separation, divorce. A lot of times you see what I see, parents who come in and there's all this anger, and I can feel all this anger, and I know that it's not about rules, and it's not about structure, and it's not about discipline. And then the more we talk, it's like they start coming at each other about things that were going on during the relationship. And these people have been separated for 5 or 10 years, and it's kind of like, you're still, and the kids are getting caught in the middle of that. And I'll ask children to leave the room and give these people, some of them, the ending was abrupt, and they never really had the opportunity to process all this anger and frustration with one another. And I think that the step-parent needs to be an integral part of that, because this is a new person on the scene. This is somebody who's very involved in the care of this child, and that people can remain non-conflictual, and non-conflictual not only when the child is around, but also when the child isn't around, so that they can be talking about what's happening with this kid. If they need to make telephone calls about something that's happening at school, if there's a biological parent that's out of town and a step-parent needs to step in for whatever reason and pick somebody up, bring somebody to a doctor's appointment. I mean, it's only going to benefit the children in the end.
So good communication, willingness to communicate for the sake of the child.
I think that gets forgotten and lost a lot of times.
Right, because you're saying there's vestiges of the previous relationship,
Right.
And the problems in a previous relationship.
I think it's also important too to recognize that sometimes newer relationships, sometimes they bank on that. It's kind of like there's some insecurity maybe on the new partner's behalf that maybe they still love or care about. They know that they have this attachment to the other person because they share a child in common. So sometimes the biological parent will say to the new step parent, and they'll kind of discount the other biological parent that's not living in the home to kind of, make the step parent feel less insecure. And I think that can snowball and get a little out of control, and people need to be really careful about kind of demonizing the other person.
Right. What are the signs? Are there signs that a parent or a step-parent could come across in their children in particular, or within the dynamics of their blended family, that indicate that they should go seek professional help?
Typically, I think things are going to present themselves in children. You're asking specifically. I think they're going to manifest themselves in a behavioral way. Somehow, you're going to see things happening in school that you haven't seen before. It's going to be something new, and it's going to affect their functioning, either academically or in their social relationships with other children, in their relationships with a sibling, in their relationship with a parent. It'll be something new. I think you'll see something pop up, and it will be kind of surprising. Another thing to look for is whether or not it's affecting functioning. I mean, is the family able to go and do things that are enjoyable activities, and they can't get things done because the two stepchildren are fighting and nothing ever gets accomplished, and it's a consistent pattern.
Is it reasonable to expect that there will be some behavioral change or academic change when there is a change in the structure of a family in some way?
I think that's the piece where the patience part comes in. I think it's reasonable to assume that things will change, and developmentally things will change also. I mean, just naturally children are going to have situations where academically and behaviorally they're going to change just because they're growing and they're developing. But specifically as far as blended families go, I think you're going to see those changes. The thing to look for is whether or not it becomes a consistent pattern that doesn't change. Is the same conflict popping up over and over and over? Is the behavior something that doesn't shift if there's consequences? Or if it's academically, does half a school year go by and still nothing is getting better? If this is typical course of grief or frustration or adjustment or transition, over the course of time you're going to see some improvement with little action. If it becomes a consistent pattern that doesn't shift or change, there's probably something else happening that needs further exploration.
Would you go out on a limb here and give an idea of a time span that you would expect improvement or at least movement in perhaps behavioral change you see? The reason I'm asking that is that I've mothered 2 teens, and they change so fast, and sometimes teens, for example, will go and spend a lot of time in their room where they never did before, and or suddenly they would, there would be new friends involved, and that I wasn't quite sure of, and I never knew how long I should wait to see if things were going to change again. That was one of the hardest parts of parenting, particularly teenagers, but tweens are, an issue as well. We're an issue as well.
I wouldn't let anything go too long. I think regardless of this situation, whether or not there's behavioral or academic issues popping up, I think that any family that's going through a transition like this can benefit from some kind of assistance, because there's always going to be things that kids don't want to tell their parents, and there's always going to be things that couples don't want to talk about in front of children that probably need to be hashed out, that sometimes they're going to have difficulty doing. I think anybody could benefit. In terms of a timeline, I think you have to really watch the pattern of behavior. If it's something that shifts and changes and it seems like it gets better over the course of time, if it's I wouldn't let it, if it's a real problem, they're going to up the ante. That's what I would see the problem continually getting worse.
Getting worse. Okay. All right. That's very helpful. I'm sorry. My brain just went on hold. I did have a specific question. What about joint custody? I know that that's becoming more and more popular. Is that something that counselors in general, do you think generally that that's a good idea? Is that more palatable for a child, or is it more difficult for a child?
I think it reduces issues of loyalty that kids frequently pop up on. They feel, I see a lot of children who will be with one parent for, an entire week, and then they only see another, their other biological parent on the weekends or something like that. They've grown a greater attachment to a step parent than maybe they have to a step parent in the other household, and they have a lot of loyalty issues around that. I think when it's a joint custody situation, you see a lot less of that. I think it becomes a bigger issue whether or not there's consistency across households, and that there be greater communication across households when there's a joint custody situation, because you don't want kids to have a lack of consistency, or they're definitely going to start to exhibit symptoms of something. That lack of structure is going to be somewhat disconcerting and probably raise anxiety in children.
Okay, that was very helpful. Just for people who perhaps have never been in a counseling situation before, have never asked for this kind of professional help, would you just describe or explain a little bit about what people might expect when, say, they made a phone call to your center? And there will be a website address posted on the screen, and your phone number of your center on our screen as we're speaking now, okay? Would you just give people an idea of what they might expect when they make that phone call or when they walk in the door for the first time?
Well, pretty consistently it's on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the presenting issue is when someone calls in. If this is somebody who calls in and saying that their child's exhibiting some kind of behavioral something or other, and they think it's on account of a remarriage or something along those lines, usually what will happen is we'll take the first 3 sessions and do a full assessment. And that's usually going to be some combination of the child individually, the parents individually, and then the entire family together, so that we can get a comprehensive view of what's happening for the child systemically. And then a recommendation will be made from there on to give a full treatment plan for the course of treatment, to figure out what it is exactly that can be done to reduce symptoms.
So is it usually an hour, 3-hour-long sessions over?
Sessions are usually between 45 to 50 minutes.
And do you usually do it like once a week, or is that not a
It's typically weekly. It depends on the recommendation, and for some people, just convenience and a matter of what, you don't want to make coming for counseling a more stressful thing for people, and depends on the level of need. I mean, if these are symptoms that are out of control and there are people that need to come in on a weekly basis to get things under control, certainly accommodations are made so that people can get in as often or as infrequently as they need to, so that it doesn't become a stressor for them.
Right, okay. Well, thank you very much for coming and spending this half hour with us. Hopefully we've given some insight into the problems and the solutions for problems that blended families may have.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, Parenting in the 21st Century.